And you chose us, so thank you. Appreciate that. I would like to quickly introduce myself, and I know you guys are not here to hear me, but you are to hear the other members on the panel. So I'm Swanand Mokashi. I'm the founder of my software consulting company, Malaika Consultants. And last time I came here, I was on the panel and had a lot of fun. So somehow I think people liked that too and got me back. As long as everybody can hear me all right, that's good. I'm gonna apologize for my accent to start with. It's my parents' fault, not mine. So having said that, I would like to bring on the panel members. Neil, why don't you come up? And I would let him introduce himself so we can get going.
Sure. Hey everyone, thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to join you tonight. My name is Neil Fox. My current role is the Chief Technology Officer at Hexaware for North America. Hexaware is a global IT services company with 17,000 people in various development centers around the world. We help companies of all industries develop better software and bring in robotic process automation and lots of great technologies and people to do fun stuff. I spent my first 20 years of my career in software product development. So I started a software company when I was 16 and did custom development, and then went on to various roles at Lawson Software, CIO at Red Hat here in town, and then for the last 15 years working with companies around the world to optimize their software development lifecycle and processes. So I'm honored to work with an incredible array of organizations like Delta Airlines and Lifetime Fitness and IQVIA here in town, Standard & Poor's and Virgin Active in the UK, and on and on and on. Lots of great companies. I work very closely with the executive management there to bring efficiencies and effectiveness to software development. So that's my background.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So Matthew, I'm going to call you next.
Hi, I'm Matt Cotter. I am the CTO of Employus. It's a local startup. We automate and build referral or employee referral programs for anywhere from a local Chick-fil-A store all the way up to Delta and Georgia Pacific's corporate offices. Before this, I was an engineer over at Bronto. Been in the startup scene for a while now. Had a startup before that. Been in North Carolina, specifically Raleigh, all my life, born and bred, and even went to NC State.
Wow.
And our biggest challenge right now is just making HR software that doesn't suck, which is a big endeavor.
Fantastic. Why don't we go ahead and say what is comfortable, right? So I believe Carlos is missing today. I think he is tending to a sick child, so we'll have more time for you guys to talk.
More time for you guys to talk.
Great, sounds good. So since we are looking at IT trends in this particular session, I would like to start with that. Being the industry leaders that you are now, what kind of trends do you see in the next, say, 2 years, 1 year? And we're not gonna hold you to that, but what do you think is gonna be the trend? Not just the few trends, but what is gonna be amongst those trends, what's gonna be the trend in the future or near future?
Well, it's not hard to say AI is probably the biggest opportunity for every industry, every company out there, right? The way I see the marketplace today is you have established companies looking for driving efficiency, right? If you look at the globalization of IT services, it's very hard to find anything unique, right? Differentiation in your organization is very challenging, and so you have to rely on efficiency, right? You can't have high cost and inefficient organizations to today. So we do a lot of robotic process automation. If you look at any help desk today, 25 to 50% of the calls into help desk is for what? Password reset, right? Why have a human, resetting the password? What a waste of time when you can have a simple robot reset the password. And it goes on and on. Software development is horribly inefficient most of the time, right? It's unpredictable in terms of when we're going to deliver, what we're going to deliver, at what cost. And so driving a lot of agile transformation, a lot of digital transformation, bringing collaborative teams that are distributed geographically to a wide variety of locations is certainly a major trend. But in that regard, right, machine learning and AI is a real fundamental piece of just the big trend towards welcoming our robotic overlords, right?
I would say accessibility to technology. I mean, we've seen things that are pretty modular and you kind of puzzle piece things together, but from the startup standpoint, pretty much you don't have to build anything yourself. Everything is very modular in a way that you can move 10 times faster if you can just find these little pieces and patches and kind of do some of this rapid prototyping. And I've been finding that the more we kind of go back and build something or have a new endeavor that we're building, the more that we kind of look out and find these new companies, whether it's this little thing that can do a chat, this little thing, like Google Cloud. AI and machine learning is available to everybody with free for a year because Google Cloud will give you $300 to try it. I mean, everything's accessible now through that. And I think leveraging that is definitely going to be the biggest trend, because that's going to be a huge waste of time reinventing the wheel every time.
And I'll add one more comment, which is, if you haven't paid attention to 5G yet, you should. There's some great videos out there on the difference between 5G and the previous technologies. And oh my God, right? This is going to change all of our lives here. And I'll add one more comment, which is, if you haven't paid attention to 5G yet, you should. There's some great videos out there on the difference between 5G and the previous technologies. And oh my God, right? This is going to change all of our lives here pretty dramatically. Maybe not in the 2-year horizon, but maybe a little bit beyond that, right? It's not just high bandwidth at 50 times the amount of bandwidth, but the latency is at 1 millisecond, right? Which is real time. So you'll have real time, globally distributed, augmented reality, and video. It's really going to be a major trend that we should all pay attention to.
Great, fantastic. So now that we know some of the hot trends that are going to be there for you two, one of the things that always happens is last year there was something different. The year before that there was something different again. And most of the technologies are hot for a reason, but some of them just sizzle out one way or other. So an example would be Bitcoin or blockchain technology, which was so hot all this time. It's a great technology. The stock market took it and just went with it and then took it down again. So things like that can happen with trends, but how do you plan for that, or more than plan for, how do you convince your stakeholders to go follow these new and hot trends, because you're seeing a future in that, but at the same time with the knowledge that they could fizzle at any time? How do you deal with that?
Why don't you answer first, man?
Sure. So we have in the startup world kind of a luxury in that standpoint where we're more worried about solving a problem than kind of working on a new technology. So when we approach a situation, we are solving the problem, not the technology. So at that point, we very rarely have some fizzle out, because we've used a technology, whether it's a slice in time, a version that we've used, but that fixed a problem set for us, and that problem set hasn't changed. If that problem set changed, that's a different thing. But I would say, yeah.
So I think
we're basically solving the problem, not trying to find a solution, a technology solution for it.
Yeah, and I think some of the answer lies in what you were saying earlier about accessible technology, right? Things are, where you used to have to, if you're going to develop natural language processing, for instance, right, what would you have to do? You'd invest millions of dollars and thousands of lives, right? Today, you just pluck it off of one of the vendors that has natural language processing, right? I remember when I worked for Lawson, we were developing resume scanning and trying to pull latent semantic indexing out of resumes to do keyword and relevancy matching and all that. Oh my God, it was expensive, it was hard. This is going back, 15 years. But now, right, it's available off the shelf, and components are a lot more switchable. So the answer to your question for me is really about architecture, right? Having loosely coupled microservices versus hard-coded tied to any one particular technology, using the readily available technologies from major vendors that will help us avoid the cryptocurrency nightmare, which was just a big Ponzi scheme, obviously.
Strong words. But true, yes. So my next one is going with that conversation. How do you come up with data to present to your stakeholders that you want to invest in certain direction or you don't want to direct in some? People come out, a lot of stakeholders are very in tune with what the stock market is doing. And once a new trend starts coming in, sometimes it's the need that the IT folks need to come and either stop them or push them in the right direction. So how do you collect data like that just to give a good presentation to them?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great challenge you mentioned. I said robotic process automation here a few times, and this is one of the areas where you kind of have to make a bet on what tool you're going to use, right? RPA is not one of those things that is easily accessible off the shelf. You have to bet on a tool, and today there's no real clear leader, right? This is CompTIA and a couple of others that should be around for a while, but your point is a really good one. I think you have to build a business case, you have to build a proof of concept to demonstrate that it will work here. There's a lot of failed RPA programs out there too, right? It's nothing is a panacea. You have to go in with your eyes open, with reasonable expectations, and work on POCs that will drive benefits for your organization. It's really hard to compare even like industries to one company against another because there's so much complexity when it comes to culture, tools, and distribution of resources, et cetera. So my advice is to take whatever you can off the shelf, start small, demonstrate progress, make big bets on top of successful programs.
So I would say short term, for us, we have to keep an eye on what is going to keep more people coming into the door. And so it's a very clear, are people going to buy this? Are people not going to buy this? Is this feature going to be added in? Is somebody going to want to upgrade their account to this? And that really dictates our short term. A long term goal, our goal is to increase the amount of referrals generated. And increase engagement and do all these different things for the actual end user. But the short term, we have to keep constant data on, we added this part, these extra features to a demo that got this much turnaround on that demo. So in the short term, we need to fast track these features versus these features. And then we aggregate long-term user trends to see where our product is going into the future. And then in the short term, our biggest metric that we look at is how, and not only metric but feedback, is from how our initial users are being onboarded, because they're coming in fast, they're coming in hot, and they're going to have the quickest drop off with the most feedback. So we try to focus in on small aspects that we can get the most out of to kind of help our day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, but you're talking about prioritizing features, making bets on features, functionality. I think that's different than the question about how do you make bets on technology, right? So that you can't really abstract the functionality from the technology. So if you're going to have to bet on a piece of software to enable a particular feature, how do you decide and how do you kind of sell to your stakeholders a particular direction on technology?
Right.
That's really the question.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's a little more challenging, right? And it's very hard because for you guys who are a startup, you can make small bets, and
it's a different problem set.
It's a definitely different problem set. But for large enterprises, it can be really daunting to say I'm going to bet $1 million or $2 or $3 on Pega or whatever the technology is. That is important, and the ROI is there, but the longevity may not be, and the business case may be a bit shaky. So my only advice is start small, test it, and then continue to bet on things that work well for you. It's hard. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's always a good advice, I guess. No matter the age of the technology, always start small and see if it works for you.
Yeah.
So thank you. Neil mentioned artificial intelligence as one of the hot areas that's going to be it's already there, and I see that the usage is increasing every day. But there are some very specific ethical issues that have been raised against artificial intelligence. One of them being obviously that as efficient as it is, the disadvantage with it is there might be a rise in unemployment because of it. And then we have seen what happened in the past with the elections and all of that, where artificial intelligence can dictate or have biases towards races and genders and things like that. So with that negativity associated with it, though it's a small negativity, how do you balance the advantage and disadvantages of, how do you sell artificial intelligence?
Do you want to answer first?
Sure. We've actually touched in a little bit on how we're going to introduce artificial intelligence into our platform. We have two aspects of how we would kind of approach it. One would be, what jobs are good for people and what people are good for jobs. And it kind of goes to kind of like back to blockchain a little bit, like knowing what this is going to be used for and being very aware that there might be unknown ramifications. I would say I'm not nervous about adding an AI that can recommend a better job for somebody, but I am more nervous about a AI that can recommend a job or a person to a job, because now a job doesn't have a gender, doesn't have an age, doesn't have those kind of things. So I would just say, going into something kind of blindly, when we go to see these new technologies coming out, everybody's got AI, and it does this one little thing, and who knows if it's actually working or not. It's a nice buzzword to have, but kind of keeping an eye on what your problem set is and where it can expand to make sure that if you're going to go into an area where AI is touching a person or looking at something about a person, you're going to have, it could go that way. So, I mean, we try to keep, that's something that's at least in the back of my mind when we're kind of going through that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of insights to share on this one. One is I was on a camping trip with some parents from my kid's school 2 years ago or so, and knew I was in the technology field, and we were talking about AI, and he asked me a question that I thought was pretty interesting. He said, "When should we be scared? When should I worry about robots?" And my answer was pretty simple, which is when they start inventing themselves, panic. Right? So when robots start building robots, I think we've crossed the line into some dangerous territory. Also, as a parent of fairly young kids, I have two boys, 12 and 14, I do worry about their future a little bit, right? I want them to go into fields that are harder to automate and to replace with robots. I think with AI, I do relate to the comments by the folks who panic, Elon Musk, for instance, and other really intelligent people who said the biggest danger to our society is artificial intelligence. There's certainly something to be said for that. I think there are times in our history where technology has gotten just ahead of our politics and our ability to regulate and to even understand the implications of that technology, and certainly AI is probably the biggest example of that in our generation that we can think of. So I do think we need to be thoughtful about how we regulate and control artificial intelligence. And I have trouble saying those words because I'm not a big fan of control and regulation, but it does have the potential to be very dangerous, as well as very beneficial, like all technologies. The last insight I'll share is every technology advancement had that same fear, right? The car, you name it, computers, right? They're gonna put everybody out of work. And it's never happened, right? So I'm a little less concerned about robots replacing people and unemployment, because I do believe that we'll need to maintain those robots until they start building themselves, of course. But I'm a little less worried about that, and more worried just about the implications of what people will do with artificial intelligence. The fact that AI can mimic humans pretty closely. Most of the time, for fun, if I'm in a chat session on a website, I'll ask the person or the robot, "Are you a robot?" And then they'll of course say, "No, I'm a human being." I'll say, "Well, that's just what a robot will say." But so it's always interesting to have a dialogue with intelligence, whether it be artificial or real, but it's getting harder to tell.
Very cool. Technology seems to be changing so much every day now. It's almost like if you're not in touch for 6 months, then you might as well start fresh. I mean, with any company or any organization, it's as strong as its weakest member, I would think. So with that. Very good. So we were talking about cutting edge technology. Obviously, it tends to, from an organization point of view, it tends to attract as updated as possible as far as the technology stack is concerned.
So in my opinion, it's hard to change somebody. So it's really starting about, as cliche as it is, hiring the right people. And that's why when I was hiring my engineers, one of the biggest questions I asked was, when's the last time you learned something? Something new. It didn't have to be a technology. It didn't have to be anything. It could be a language or a musical instrument. It was just seeing somebody and seeing how they can react to that feeling of when they learn something and see how excited they got about something. Like, you can see that they want to keep doing that. And so I made sure that anybody I was bringing into my company, because if I had, as you said, a weakest member, and that's, if you have a 3-person team or a 5-person team or something like that, that's a big proportion of it.
Sure.
And so everybody, and I kind of relied on them to actually bring information to me as well. They were more on the forefronts of all these different things that I had to be kind of more of a subject matter expert. I couldn't get on the fringe of everything. But I definitely had a great team that could keep us all in line on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Our company had its first ever customer appreciation event last week in Orlando, and part of these kind of events, you bring in celebrity speakers. And we brought in Guy Kawasaki. I don't know if you guys know Guy Kawasaki, but he was a very early employee at Apple, had a strong relationship with Steve Jobs, and is considered a visionary and evangelist, and costs a lot of money to bring in. And he shared a lot of great insights with us, but one of them, Matt, was very much what you were saying about the people that you hire. And I'll give you his law of, so it's Guy Kawasaki's law of what he called bozoism. And his law, I thought, was very simple and very insightful, which is A players hire A players, B players hire C players, and C players hire D players. So the minute you hire a B player, you're screwed, right? You're in trouble, because they're going to hire people less smart and less effective than they are to make themselves look good. Hire only A players was his theme. I thought it was insightful and useful. And I think, Matt, what you said kind of off the cuff was really smart, which is it's hard to change people. We have 17,000 employees, and they're all developers, and I haven't found a way yet to teach somebody to give a crap. Right? It's really hard to teach somebody to care. It seems to be like you're either born caring about what you do and the quality that you do and the education that you have and learning, right? Or you're not. And so I don't know that you can get a C player to be a B player or an A player. Maybe you can get a C player to be a B player. I don't know you can get a B player to be an A player. I think it's really hard. I think that, and I talk to a lot of people about hiring millennials, and there's definitely a stereotype out there about millennials, not falling into that A player category as a generation. I don't know that I agree with that, but that's certainly stories that I've heard about. It's really hard to find people in their 20s and 30s that really have passion for what they do. So it is a challenge. The only thing I'll add, and I don't want to monopolize the time, is that if you hire A players, our view is to give them full stack development education. So it used to be in technology, you would focus on one piece of aspect of technology. You'd be a back-end developer, you'd be a DBA, you'd be a front-end developer, and that would be your specialty. And that's very legacy of the automotive assembly line, right? I'm gonna do it to you, you'll hand it over. That is dead. And if it's not dead, it should be, and it's fast dying, right? What we want is people that can really be a full stack developer. You can't know all technologies, but you can know front end and back end, you can know back end and database, you can know more than one piece. And we want people to be more holistic in their approach, right? Gone are the days, I hope, of the waterfall, I'll code, you'll test, you'll deploy, you'll operate. it should really be seamless. And what we're seeing today, thankfully, is finally a blurring of lines between business and technology. If your company draws a hard line between I'm the business, you're a vendor to me as the internal IT folks, that is a dying and should be dead mentality, right? Business is IT, IT is business. We have some of our large customers now taking a business person, making them the CIO. That's a pretty dramatic move, but it works very well to show the company we are technology, we are IT, there's no difference, right? So it's a long answer to your short question, I apologize.
I will add.
Yeah, please.
You had mentioned that you said that it's hard to get a B person to an A, and you can't really change anybody. I do have a counterpoint to that. People can change. I would just say it's usually for the worst. If you get somebody who's an A player and you put him into a team that doesn't let them play at A level, his way to go B to C. I've had experiences in that where it's just you kind of get bled out of a big organization. And then to the other one, I would say like I've had like an internal debate of what is the difference between like a developer and an engineer. It's very semantically correct, the same, and I have a draw a hard line of that of you can have engineers, very dedicated engineers for back end and front end, but they're not an engineer unless they know the whole stack, or at least they know that their line of code has these implications to the front, to the back, left and right. A developer somebody that can go in, work on what they're working on, and leave. If you think about bridges, developer can make something that work 5-6 times, and engineer has to make it work for the rest of the time. But
No, I think it's a great comment that you can kill motivation and you can turn an A player into a B player by putting them in a bad environment. It's a good.
I would ask you though, as that company gets bigger though, that is a much harder challenge to keep. Like, how would you begin to recommend that?
Yeah, it is really hard. Scale is hard for any business, right? So when you hit a certain point, you run into trouble because can you hire all A players? You really can't, right? And that's true not just for IT, but for every function. And so scaling beyond a certain point is really challenging. You just have to be diligent about it. And I would say at the end of the day, one of my favorite quotes ever is from Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Right? And it's a great quote because it's so true. You have to build a culture that is based on empowerment and accountability and facilitation and transparency. If you do that, then the cream automatically rises to the top and the bottom feeders get, because they're being held accountable, everything is transparent and they're empowered. If they don't perform, they'll leave on their own. That's not an easy thing to do, but honestly, I spend the majority of my personal time working with CIOs and CTOs and other organizations to build that culture or to change their current culture to that model. It's not easy, but it's the most important thing to do.
Great, sounds good. So on the flip side, just flipping the question on its head, if advice would you give to an individual contributor or to the IT professional who wants to make that change from a B to E or B to A rather, or more than that, if he or she wants to be at the cutting edge of technology as much as he or she can, given how much hours the developers typically work and work-life balance, etc. How would you, what would you suggest to the individuals so that they can be, up to date?
Okay. So if you're somebody that has a passion for technology, I think it comes naturally. You're looking for certifications and classes. There's a lot of great material out there. If you look at what Microsoft is doing with their Azure DevOps Cloud now, is really, really robust. There's a lot of education you can get there about the entire life cycle and automation of that life cycle. So my answer is, if you're passionate about it, you'll learn and go down that curious path and bring that education to your organization. There's so much opportunity out there. AWS, Amazon Web Services, has 300 different products. You could spend your time learning about an AWS certification, one of 50 different certifications you can get. And I was amazed at the number of products and technologies you can absorb. Just on the database side alone, they've got 5 different database products. So the point is, that if you're an individual contributor, there's no shortage of opportunity for you to consume. I would suggest you attach yourself to either Azure or AWS and go as deep as you can into cloud and automation in those platforms.
So yeah, not much to add on that, but the other than Google Cloud, we're GCP over at Employus, but you know, I found a lot of doing something that not necessarily is in your field, just getting out there and learning something different. Going back to like a new sport, anything really has aspects to can bring back to technology. I mean, how many times have you had a problem that you couldn't have solved until you were in the shower, not thinking about it? Like I truly learning anything is an exercise of the brain and expanding on something. Like if I were to keep going and learn a new database, that's great. It's into better technology, you know, for the next step. But if I were to try and expand into a new foreign language or try to do something that's completely different for me, I'm actually expanding my brain instead of kind of focusing back in. So I would only say if you're having struggle of trying to be the top engineer, you know, oh, I'm gonna keep learning what everybody else is learning. Don't. Learn something completely different. Learn something about cognitive, you know, how people's brains think. And then you can actually bring a new aspect of how a user would use your product. So I would say not just necessarily type holding into something, but if you can bring something to the conversation, whether it be technology or something else, it'll be added.
I'll riff on that last point for a second because I think this is important. So if you're anybody in the company, in the technology side, business side, whatever, you need to be able to read a balance sheet, right? If you're a technologist, don't pigeonhole yourself into technology. Understand the value that you're building, right? And why you're building this feature. If you don't know why you're writing a line of code, don't write that line of code, right? You need to ask value of this thing that we're building. Who's going to use it? How are they going to use it? What are they going to use it for? What do they expect from it, right? Well, and so my advice is to really think about the entire.
So there is a thin line between the two as to whether you will have the best person to do the best technology or not. So how do you balance that from an organization point of view? And you know that I'm going to flip that and ask from an individual point of view. So
Say the question.
So the
attracting top talent.
Yeah.
Okay. So going back to the A, B, and C type people. So I've hired a lot of people that I would say on the face of it would be a B, but and going back to the question I always ask them, when's the last time you learned something? You can see a gleam in their eye, and then you can just see that they just haven't found out that they're an A yet. And so when I'm looking for somebody, you know, if you're trying to find, you know, I need the best Go programmer, right, out there. There's a list, I'm sure, you can go find it, they're all in high demand. But if you can find somebody who's passionate about learning something, who is willing to do anything and can be honest about it and say, I don't know that, but I know how to figure it out. I would say you're gonna open yourself up for a bigger pool of people that you can pull or go from, and then they will grow with you and your company will grow with them. And then we've had great success from that.
Yeah, I think the challenge is a little different than what you described. I don't think it's about finding top talent for specific technology. I think it's more about the innovator's dilemma, right? How do you break out of a cycle of you've now got customers and now you need to service those customers? How do we bring innovation into the company because all of our resources are now tied up in servicing our existing customers? Right? I think a bigger problem than an individual for particular talent. I think, you know, how do we drive a continuous cycle of innovation? It's a challenge. And so I would focus more on a culture that allows a certain percentage of time for people to focus on the things that you just described, Matt, right? How do we give our people the latitude to work on something that doesn't have immediate need for a particular client, right? But is a strategic, you know, imperative.
I would say having hack days is a great doing that, because
hackathons are awesome.
You know, one of the companies I worked for, Bronto, they had I think once or twice a year they'd have hackathons where you have anywhere from somebody pull a Raspberry Pi that can make a robot, all the way to a new, you know, tool in the kitchen that is helping everybody to implementing a new indexing technology that ended up being utilized across the whole company. And so having the ability for being able to putting the day-to-day stuff down is going to be a huge attraction that people can just pick up whatever they want and work on it. Like we were told, don't work on your projects. That was it. It was work on something else.
Yeah, if you're not doing hackathons in your organization of any size, you really should. It's a great tool.
All right, I got a few just fun questions for you guys after this. So we talked enough about technology.
It's more fun.
It is, but it's Valentine's Day too, so let's have some fun as well. But before that, I want to ask amongst the audience if anybody has any questions for the panel. We can get those going first, and then we can move on to the next ones. Yes, sir.
Based in the U.S. market, what do you see in the next few years that the U.S. is poised to take advantage of in the IT, and what do you see that are threats, to where we're going to be left behind?
Wow. It's a great question. I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that.
I have an overly simplistic answer
Yeah,
to it.
go ahead.
GDPR is something that is great that if you have, if you're in the United States and you have United States customers, don't have to worry about. But it's something that you gotta, people who are dealing with European customers now have to double, triple, quadruple down on something that they've already done and they're uncovering a hood of something that is they haven't touched in years. And so, currently, that's my overly simplistic answer right now.
Yeah, so I'd say that there are clear areas where the U.S. is dominant, and it's going to be hard to unseat us, right? Video, I haven't seen a lot of foreign video games. I know that they don't own much of the market, but U.S. dominates, the consoles, certainly the software on there, mobile games, and all. I don't see that going on soon. So I think that those are areas that we will be very strong in. Other areas that I think are threatening, I worry about AI, especially coming out of China and Russia, the areas that they have a very heavy scientific community to. I do get concerned about our lack of focus on science in the US. I don't think we're as strong and nearly as focused. If you spent any time in China or even in Eastern Europe, oh my God, those people go to school 7 days a week, right, in advanced science programs.
I would love my kids to do that.
I would love your kids to do that
Yeah,
too. I
let
would
them
love
go
my
to school
kids.
7 days.
Yeah.
20%.
But so I worry about those kinds of areas. I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
But what other questions do you have? I'm really eager to hear what's on your mind.
You guys turned them, I think. There you go.
Hi, so Neil, I was just curious, both of your opinions on what you think are the biggest challenges for companies that are trying to go from traditional software development methods to more agile methods to moving faster to innovating faster. What do you see as you're dealing with your customers as their biggest challenges to really, to innovate and to move at the speed that they want to move at?
Yeah, so I do this all the time, every day, all day. Exactly your question about helping companies move from kind of traditional cultures and waterfall thinking to more agile organizations. And so, in my experience, there are only two challenges. One is culture. How do you get people to get away from command and control and that whole project management, discipline that we've been beaten up with for 30 years? We've got to get away from that, right? How do we move towards empowerment, accountability, transparency, as I mentioned before? That's hard. That is really hard. And it has to come from leadership. There's no two questions about it, right? I've been involved in agile transformations that are kind of grassroots level, and people that it will fail, and it fails 100% of the time. The other biggest challenge is really about product ownership. If you're moving to an agile model, in fact, if you're developing software at all, you need to have one person that has a vision of what this thing is going to do, that can communicate that vision, that can build a business case around why we're building this software, right? What it is we're building, who we're building it for, etc. If you can solve those two challenges, agile is just mechanics after that, right? It's ceremonies and artifacts, blah, blah, blah. That's all fine, but you'd have to solve those two problems. And product ownership and vision of a product is really scarce. I mean, if you have somebody in your organization that has a clear vision of what they want, even if it's not perfect, right? Even if it clarified over time, that person is worth their weight in gold because they can communicate to stakeholders of every kind about what we're doing and why they're doing it, get people excited, right? We talked about motivation and learning. You know, you need to get people enthusiastic about what you're building and who you're building it for. So it's a great question. I hope that answers. Yeah, this gentleman. Oh, Matt, did you want to answer that?
Not much, but I would say Agile I find that Agile falls apart when you put Agile on top of a very monolithic structure, whether it be a cultural structure or architectural structure. We were talking about service-oriented architecture earlier being very modular. The greatest transformations I've seen from monolithic to like this Agile came from the transformation of the architecture. So having not only an SOA, like service-oriented architecture, but a service-oriented like engineering team. And so breaking off, maybe it's one little service, and then you build a team around that. Then you break off another, break off another, break off another, and then your monolith becomes smaller and more agile friendly.
And just one more point that you remind me of also is that your organization structure matches your architecture, which should match your value stream, right? It is a legacy organization structure to create teams based upon technology components, right? So typically you have a DBA team, you'll have a front-end team, back-end team. Get rid of all that, right? Organize around the value streams that you're delivering, and those can be related to services that you're developing that deliver full functionality rather than horizontal slices of components that don't deliver any value.
Yeah, your service-oriented architecture, one churn sets off, it should all work. So don't think of it as like your database.
That's right.
Your whole thing's gone.
That's right.
When you were talking earlier about the advancements in AI and when robots start building robots, given the human past, it seems like at some point for somebody who has the technology somewhere, economics will trump ethics. It always seems to happen. Do you feel we need to worry about somebody somewhere having that lack of ethics and robots will start building robots or whatever that negative outcome will be? It seems inevitable.
Yeah.
What are your views on that and why?
Yeah, I mean, your phrase is exactly true. It's an unfortunate characteristic of the human condition that economics trumps ethics. It's been true and is more true today than it ever has been. And I have no doubt that there's more than one somebody in a lab somewhere building robots that will build robots. And so, yeah, I think that we have no choice but to welcome our robot overlords. Yeah, I think at some point we will cross that line and have to rein it back somehow. I don't know how, especially given the global nature and the different values that different countries hold. I have no doubt that there are regimes out there that are working on technology right now that will replicate itself and attack their opposition. So I think we're in for a bit of a wild ride, and our kids especially.
Part two to this question.
Go ahead, yeah.
And I'm quoting Jodie Foster from the movie Contact, so I apologize.
I never apologize for quoting movies.
Do you feel that we will be able to survive our technological adolescence as a species?
I think it's too early to tell. I do think that our species will be a short-lived one. It's my personal opinion. I think that we either arrived at a bad time or have impacted our environment in a way that is going to be very challenging for us to be sustained, as long as the dinosaurs were here, right? Millions of years. You're asking a very personal question and giving a personal answer. I think it's going to be hard for us to survive, and if we do, it'll be very different than what we see today.
Hawking said the same thing.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
Back comes to
Oh, back to
I don't have much to add on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, I think, at the same time, I also don't want to, be a fearmonger, because I don't think there's any reason for that. I do feel like, every generation goes through the same thing. But you look like you're about the same age as me. You know, if you're old enough to remember duck and cover, you know, in the grade school, right? We were taught about, you know, if you see a bright flash, you know, duck under your desk and cover your head to protect yourself from the nuclear fallout. You know, how funny is that? But the point is still valid, which is, you know, every technological innovation is met with a certain amount of fear and resistance. It may be very true this time, right? We may be completely in trouble, but that history lesson leads me to believe that we may be able to survive this constant evolution of technical advancement and then management of that. We'll see. It'll be fun.
I'd say the only thing I'd be more worried about the accidental emergence of it. Because like if somebody's intentionally trying to do it, it's pretty obvious. You can see their motivation towards it. But I'm just thinking of all those like zombie movies that have started with like, oh, we're trying to cure cancer, you know? And then like we kept trying it, we kept doing trials, and then I don't know what happened to those people. Now there's zombies. So I would say that's the only thing I would say. But, you know, it's more likely it's going to accidentally happen, and than anything like a malicious person that coming up with it. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there's a lot of malicious people out there. I'm a huge consumer of news aggregation sites. There's a couple of news aggregators out there that I read constantly. And I saw a site today, a news article on a site that says, the site I think is called I'mNotReal.com, and it had hundreds or maybe thousands of faces that were all computer generated. So they're not real people, but they look exactly like real people. So that was a little, you know, it goes to your point, you know, how do we know how to control this runaway train that we've built? That is providing a lot of benefit, but, you know, could provide a lot of detriment as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be fun. It's a great question.
From a CTO's perspective, what do you see as the current healthcare IT challenges now and in the future?
So I work a lot with healthcare companies. So the current healthcare IT challenge today and in the future, there's so many of them. You know, healthcare companies are historically slow to adopt technologies. And so I think, you know, working with a lot of healthcare companies and insurance companies today, the best answer I have for you is that cultural change we were talking about. Right? I see a consistent pattern across established healthcare companies of command and control. Because they're a highly regulated environment, they believe they have to have that command and control in order to adhere to regulations, but it's not true. It's just it's a myth, it's a fallacy. I would use stronger language if we knew each other better. But I think that overcoming the legacy of that environment is a very big challenge for those organizations. And there's a lot of disrupting startups out there, you know, that are like Matt and his organization that see that opportunity to drive more efficiency, better technology, better usability. You know, all the things that Matt's been talking about is really ripe for healthcare disruption. I think it's the best answer I can give you. Is that okay?
I was just going to say,
Healthcare, so I just want to know what your perspective.
Yeah.
I don't have much experience in healthcare. We have there's a couple other startups that I've communicated with that are in healthcare, and I find them going very modular into what they're focusing on. I've seen a healthcare startup that failed. That was, I think, in my opinion, they were going very broad and trying to do everything. Again, I'm not into the healthcare, but there's a lot of changing regulations, I'm assuming, and having to keep up to date on all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I've seen a lot more success from healthcare companies when they go after, you know, whether it's, you know, anonymous feedback, and that's it, you know, for healthcare providers, or a little bit smarter triage, and that's all they do. And so I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's kind of what I've been seeing from the startup side.
I'll add also the corollary to your question, which is the best opportunities for healthcare. I think that there's two that I'll mention. One, I have to give a shout out to a really good friend of mine who started a bioscience company here in town, licensing some technology from NC State called CRISPR. If you haven't heard about CRISPR, it's a gene editing software, gene editing technology, and there are two types of CRISPR technology. Both of them, though, allow a very personalized and very pinpointed application of whatever it is you're trying to deliver. So Locus Biosciences here in town is developing antibiotics that target specific bacteria. So if you know anything about antibiotics today, you probably do, they're very broad, right? You issue an antibiotic, it kills bacteria willy-nilly, doesn't really care what type it is, it goes after bacteria, which causes a lot of problems in our food system, et cetera. But what CRISPR allows you to do is target a very specific bacteria, reprogram a virus to wipe out that one bacteria and nothing else. And so in terms of opportunity for healthcare, personalized medicine is going to be reality. It will be commonplace, and it will solve a lot of the challenges that we have today in our ecosystem. And I would say the corollary, the add-on to kind of CRISPR and that kind of technology is really about data science. Healthcare has a huge opportunity to mine and to correlate data around diseases and just this very complex nature of healthcare treatment. I'll put another kind of thought in your head. If you haven't seen Watson and spent any time with IBM's Watson technology, go to watsonchef.com because it's a really good example of the kinds of things we're talking about, correlation. Watson Chef, what they did was feed Watson thousands of cookbooks, thousands and thousands of cookbooks. And then you can go into Watson now and it will create a recipe for you based upon its knowledge of correlation of how ingredients go together. And so you can give it a cuisine, like Italian or Asian or Chinese or Greek, and tell it some ingredients, and it will create a new recipe for you based upon all the knowledge that it's gained through reading cookbooks. Yeah, kind of interesting.
One more question.
Hey Neil, I can ask actually multiple questions. I've been good giving great information. How will you talked more about A, B, C, etc. And there are a couple of questions that pop in my head. Can you give an example of an ideal A employee? Is it going to be always up, like a rocket in the career, or there will be some downtime, right? So can you give any example on that? That's one question. The other question is like, how will you identify, this place is not, my perfect place, I need to transition to some other better company. Like, how will you identify that? Even if the job is stable and, but things are, is there any criteria you have?
Wow. So, the first question is, how do you identify A players? Right? Is that the question? Right?
Characteristics.
Yeah, characteristics of A players. God, it's. I'd say it's not obvious. I think Matt had some good questions about what was the last thing you learned. I asked him similar questions about what you're passionate about and what you do in your off time and that kind of thing. So for me, I think attitude trumps aptitude. Right? I'm looking for somebody who has the right attitude because they can learn stuff, to your point. I think you made the point very well. I want people who are passionate, right, about something, right? Be passionate, and then I can work with you because I can take your passion and guide you in the right direction. So that's the best I can do with you on the A player side. People that are hungry and passionate and committed and exhibit those characteristics in your conversations. I'll tell you just one other thing that a good way to define to find good people is to put them into a real life situation as best that you can. I think traditional interviews are horrible. They're really ineffective, right? If you sit down in front of a whiteboard, you pose a challenge, say, hey, look, I'm working through this challenge right now, tell me how you would address it, the best thing you can do, right? Just throw out the regular interview. Tell me your strengths, your weaknesses. Give me a break, right? Come on. It's so old, it's ridiculous, right? But do somebody a pen and a whiteboard and pose them a challenge and see how they think about it and challenge them through it. I love challenging people, right? I've made more interviewees cry than I think anybody else because I want to see how they react in a challenging situation. They're going to be challenged by stakeholders, by me, by their peers. Do you crumble? Do you stand up for your beliefs? Do you handle it gracefully and respectfully? Or do you get defensive? Right? Those are all characteristics that we have seen over and over and over again, and I want to find those people before I think about hiring them. So that's a good example. And then your other question was, how do you know if you're in the wrong company and when to leave? I think it gets pretty obvious. If you haven't heard the saying that people join companies but leave managers, right? It's very true. So you might join a great company that has a lot of potential, but if your manager's a jackass, I personally cannot stand that, and I'll go out and find something else. You can escalate that. It's risky, obviously, to go above your manager's head and find somebody who will listen to you. But if it's not a good cultural fit, right, whatever your values are, if they're not being shared by your teammates and by the management that you work with, it's time to go.
Yep. So yeah, that's if there's only so many years on this earth, so if you're finding that, like I was at a great company, a great engineering team, Bronto, very similar to you join a company, you leave a manager, and that was something where I just felt just internally unhappy, and if I ever had that feel, it was a very stable job, way more stable than a startup, and so. But that was something that definitely hurt me more, was being unhappy day to day, and so it was not much ifs, ands, or buts about it. I need to do something. Now I'm working 8 times more hours every week than I was, but I'm 2-3 times happier because I'm doing what I want and I'm actually able to pursue it. But I would say stability of a job does not matter when there's no stability of life. So if you're not happy, that's more unstable than any kind of insurance or paycheck or whatever. So it's more of an internal decision.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that's well said. I've never worked a day in my life. I've never worked a single day. Right? I traveled 350,000 miles on airplanes last year. I spent 100 days in hotels, too many airports and sleepless nights and all that, but it's just been fun. It's been awesome. Right? It's a privilege for me to get to be able to do these things and work with the companies I have. The day that I wake up and I feel like I'm going to work, it's time for me to find another line of work. It's time to do something else. So I think that's very well said.
And then you're asking about the A people. You can always, I feel like you can identify like an A person because they're going back to asking why. Like somebody who can just do what you're told and like, I want it to be this way, it needs to be, up, down, left, right. And, but if you're having somebody who is pushing you back of saying, why? Why does it need to be done? And they're thinking beyond what that line of code is. And so that is a trigger right there of what is a A person versus a B person. A B person is somebody who's going to get it done, whatever you told them to get it done without question, and it's going to be exactly what you said, not what you wanted. And then like a C person is somebody who's pre-being fired. And below. And so I would say if you're trying to be pushed to be more of an A person, dedicate yourself to more of asking why things need to be done this way. You'll start to see this line of code affects this division of the company. This it affects the bottom line at the end of the day. So I would say that being able to push for that answer is where it is.
With that, be respectful of everybody's time. Please give the panel thank you. Appreciate it.